Good afternoon. Jeff Benson coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida today in our ongoing series of webinars talking about builder's risk, my favorite thing to talk about. Today is going to be a lot of fun. I guess it's fun because we're going to be talking about things that I find interesting. If you were one of the claimants, probably not as fun. And some of these claim examples, if you were the agent, might not have been quite as fun because perhaps they didn't have the proper coverage. But everything I talk about today, all the examples I give you are real life claims that happened. Some of them happened fairly recently, but they've all been real claims that happened to me as a builder's risk underwriter over the years. And when I think about claims, I think about two things. I think about a great opportunity to look at how a coverage form responds in the most important time of insurance is when a claim. And the second thing is I look at it from a sales standpoint. If I'm an agent, what's the best way to sell coverage is to give them an example of something that actually happened. And these things happen frequently too. So we will talk about some perils that are more severe. So from a severity standpoint, large claims. And then we'll talk about some of the claims that affect frequency. And we might get into a little bit of loss control as far as how we can help things prevent these from happening in the future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. See if I can do this right. Fire. Fire is the number one claim in builder's risk, and it usually is severity. I'm going to give you a few examples of fires that have happened to me, but we all watch the news and you see the apartment complex that catches on fire and burns up, or the apartment, or the dormitory, or the things that you see burning. Usually the common denominator on these large fires is these are frame projects. So kind of goes without saying. The one in Europe last year, anyway, we'll talk about some of these things. One thing that causes fires frequently in builder's risk is subcontractor error. So we had one not too long ago where the building was 95% complete. It was actually a renovation project to a historical building, very high valued, and we wrote the coverage on the existing structure and the renovations. The project was 95% complete. The roofer was having to touch up some things on the roof. So in his infinite wisdom, he decided to heat up some glue using a metal halide light bulb. I guess he'd done that in the past. So he turns the bulb on to heat the glue up. And unfortunately, he left for the day, and he left the metal halide light bulb plugged in and on. The general contractor did not check for hot spots at the end of the day. And we had a very, very large claim. So kind of brings into the subcontractor's GL and the builder's risk, but it all could have been prevented by two things. First of all, not using a bulb to heat up the glue. And second of all, if the general contractor or the project manager had walked the job site at the end of the day, perhaps they would have caught the light bulb, turned it off. So these are the kind of things that happen every day. People do make mistakes, but some of them are, with a little bit of loss control, we could have prevented that. Unprotected risk. I wrote a single family home that was being built, protection class 10 in the great state of Virginia. This is an older claim. And I did all the underwriting, and it determined that, you're looking at water supply and water pressure, and volunteer fire department, highly rated volunteer fire department, had a pond right next to the house that was being built. So we had a water supply, very expensive home being built, but I did all the homework. The home is 90% done, pending closing. The fire starts, the volunteer fire department, very, very good, gets there within minutes. Unfortunately, they had just bought a new pumper truck to pump the water out of the pond, but in their sense of urgency, they got to the fire very quickly, but they brought the wrong truck. They brought a truck that didn't have enough piping or whatever to extract the water, so they got to sit there and watch the home burn to the ground. So when you guys submit these unprotected 9 and 10 homes and projects to me, this is the kind of thing I'm thinking about, because these things do happen. So just another example of a fire that's unprotected. Catastrophic brush fire. Have we had some brush fires in the western part of our country the last year or so? We wrote one last year, and it was a very, very high value home in Southern California. And I'm watching the news, and they're talking about, I can't remember which fire it was, maybe the Camp Fire, one of those, one of the big fires. And the home that we had written was right in the middle of this fire. I'm like, oh, this is not good. The fire got there. Now, what was interesting is this is actually a success story. The owner of the project decided to hire some people to go out there and protect his home while the fire was all around it. So he basically hired some firemen. They went out, surrounded the building. Now they did some water damage protecting the structure from fire, but it was a relatively minor damage, and they saved the home. So this is actually a good story. But the reason I bring up catastrophic brush fires and cat losses is these are the times, usually the fires, 1 mile away from the building, and the agent calls and said, oh, I forgot to tell you to increase the value. So don't be that agent. How's that? So these things do happen every day. Theft and vandalism. Now these are more of the frequency problems we have in builder's risk. And there is a lot of theft and vandalism. So a couple of different ways we can prevent some of these things, and we'll talk about that. But let's talk about what happens every day. Job site theft. This is another time to look at the coverage form that you're selling. A lot of forms, they don't include, sometimes some don't include theft. Some have high deductibles for theft. And others say, we only cover the materials once they're actually attached to the structure. So we had a situation where it was a Friday afternoon, and the air conditioning units were delivered for this really nice home, a couple of units. And it was Friday afternoon, and the builder didn't really want to install the AC on Friday afternoon, so they put it in the garage, locked it up, came back on Monday morning, said, let's put the AC in, opened the garage, and guess what? No ACs, they were gone. It was back during when everybody was stealing stuff for copper and this and that. So fortunately, this was for them. It was on our form, and we cover theft of building materials, interest of subcontractors, whether installed or meant to be installed. So they had full coverage. So even though they locked it up in the garage, what could they have done to prevent that? Maybe checked on the job site during the weekend or something. There could have been something they could have done. Temporary storage. We had a situation where it was a very, very high-end home and a very expensive door. Believe it or not, these are thousands and thousands of dollars just for the front door. It came from the manufacturer and was delivered. The builder took delivery of it, decided they didn't have time to install it, so they put it in a temporary building. And you can guess what happened. So what happened was someone stole the door, never seen again. A claim for temporary storage because the door wasn't on the job site. It was temporarily being stored somewhere else. So two of the things you need to look at on your forms are the limits that are included, if they are included, for either transit or temporary storage. These are the leading causes of theft in building materials. Have one more interesting one that I was thinking about. So landscaping is something you don't think about, but people spend a lot of money on landscaping. We had a builder that we insured in Tennessee, and they were sodding the yard on the home. So the sod came, it was delivered. They didn't have time to put the sod on, so they left for the day. They came back the next day, and the sod was gone. This happened to the same builder 3 times in the subdivision. I don't know who was stealing the sod, but they were stealing the entire yard. So it's almost like one of those commercials you see on TV. This builder lost the yard 3 times. So anyway, interesting things. You wouldn't think about sod being stolen, but it was. Wind and hail. Now this affects obviously all the people along the coast, primarily the East Coast, from Maine to Texas. We have, large tropical wind systems and northeast wind systems. We've had webinars where we talk about percentage wind deductibles and so on and so forth. But another one is the hail. We have a lot of hail exposure throughout the Midwest. Obviously, you know about the hail belt, which is Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. There is some thought that these hailstorms are getting more violent and getting bigger. We don't know. But we've had a number of claims recently where people buy a house with the intent of, they're going to renovate it and resell it. And they buy the house, to have the hailstorm, we go out to adjust the claim, and there's been a lot of roof damage. And this is hard to prove from a carrier standpoint, but a lot of times the damage was done before the owner of the property even owned it. So these are one of those things, like, we got to be really, really careful. And I would suggest that anybody that buys a house with the intent, or a building with the intent of repairing it, does a thorough inspection of the roof. Because we don't want to, we don't mind, we have to pay the claims while we're on it. We just don't want to pay for a claim for damage that was done years ago. So just a little tip for us that would help the program on the wind and hail. On the coastal side of things, kind of what I said with the brush fire, and this just happened. We had a little storm in the Gulf, didn't amount to much, which was good news. But the day before the storm, an agent called me and he goes, "Oh, I forgot to call you last week and tell you that the project's been extended. It's still under construction, so I need to extend it." Well, by that time, the storm had been named. It was within a few miles of the coast of Louisiana. We had frozen binding authority. We could not increase the value. We couldn't even, so it was uninsured during the storm. So don't wait until these storms are imminent. Make sure everything's in place well before. And it's this time of year, guys, so it's going to happen. We're going to have more. So that's the coastal side of things. On the existing structure, we talked about that. Don't insure stuff that is already, the damage is already there. And on the tornado side of things, we've been seeing a lot of the reinsurance people are telling us that the convective wind currents are such that there's more tornado activity than ever before. You are starting to see wind and hail deductibles further inland. I've seen wind and hail deductibles all over the Midwest now. Now, we only have them in certain states and certain areas, but other carriers and some of the personalized carriers are putting wind and hail deductibles. I saw one in Minnesota the other day. That was almost unheard of to me. But so there's something to that. So, but just keep in mind, make sure insurance to value is there. Make sure your insured understands the deductible. If you have multiple projects insured in the same area, make sure it's all done properly. So just a little word of warning. Water damage. I read an article the other day where water damage and builder's risk is almost catching fire as far as the #1 peril. So you think of water damage, you think of a flood, you think of the ocean, storm surge, you think of the river flooding like it did in Arkansas. But a lot of this water damage occurs for different reasons. We're going to talk about some of these. Subcontractor error. We had one the other day. A builder was working in a 3-story building. The plumber was working and just happened to leave the water on. And he left for the weekend. So he left the water on Friday, came back Monday. All 3 floors of the building were damaged. Now if the builder had checked on this, they might have prevented this, but they didn't. So this was substantial water damage by the subcontractor, creates a GL problem and a builder's risk problem. It's pretty substantial claim on the water damage. Another thing that's a hot topic in builder's risk today is water intrusion. I'm going to read you an endorsement from another carrier, not us, that puts it in their policy. And it says, the interior of any building or structure caused by or resulting from rain, snow, sleet, ice, sand, or dust, whether driven by wind or not. That is in the exclusion section. So they are excluding water intrusion. Just for a little marketing for us, we do not exclude that on our form, which is a big plus for us. But having said that, it could be as simple as somebody left the window open for the weekend, storm comes, damages the interior of the building. The form that you presently have it on might not have the coverage. So just a little coverage thing there, but water intrusion is a big deal. The other thing that we still get sometimes, and I find that very interesting, is property in the open. So obviously, builder's risk is property that is delivered to the job site. Maybe the framing package is delivered and it sits on the job site. You need to, some of this stuff is designed to be exposed to the weather. It should be okay, but some of it isn't. So kind of common sense says, don't leave property in the open, exposed to the elements, because that is excluded in the builder's risk policy. So you need to be careful about property in the open. Just a little word of warning, because we've had a number of those claims in recent times. Another little tip too is, buildings are built and until they're enclosed, they're kind of designed to get wet. They're going to get wet, that's fine. But as it gets closer to being enclosed, and then when they finally enclose it, then it's not designed to get wet after that. So you got to be careful for roof leaks and stuff like that. You can cause a lot of problems. It can lead to mold down the road. So make sure, first of all, it's dried out before they enclose it. And then once they enclose it, make sure there's no leaks. Little tip. Collapse. I really do like this. This is a big problem in builder's risk, and it's primarily for renovations. So we had one not too long ago where we wrote a renovation policy. We had existing structure, whatever value. We had some renovations being done to it. Everything was fine. As they took apart the existing structure to get ready for the renovations, they noticed that several of the load-bearing walls were damaged. So the general contractor decided, I'm going to take it. I've never done this before, but I think I can fix this. So the general contractor started trying to repair the structural load-bearing walls in the building. So you kind of guess where I'm going with this. The general contractor didn't know what they were doing, and sure enough, the building collapsed, and it was a major loss. We have a major claim. We have debris removal. It ended up costing a fair amount of money. And the reason, I'm the underwriter, I talk about this, and I get paid to produce underwriting profit. But if you think about the average rate in builder's risk is around 20 cents per 100 of labor and materials, you have some of these large claims, it takes a lot of new business to make up for it. So that's why we try to underwrite as carefully as we can. I like this, the overconfident general contractor. It happens a lot. It's like if they truly are a structural engineer, or they've hired an engineer, they've done this work before, we'll take a look at these things. We're going to underwrite it very carefully. But the typical builder is not experienced enough to do these structural things. And I do get a kick out of you agents. I had one the other day. They were going to lift the home up and put it on a trailer and move it down the street and put it on a new slab. And the agent called me and he said, Jeff, is that structural? I don't think it is what he told me. I kind of had a chuckle out of that. I would say that is. I had another one where it was a 2-story building, and they're going to add 3 stories on top of the existing 2 stories. And they wanted to know if I thought that was structural. The answer is yes, that is structural. So these are highly specialized types of projects. So you need to underwrite. As agents, you need to make sure these builders have experience in what they're actually doing. So enough said. So that was kind of it in a nutshell as far as the major perils that we're talking about. And these claims all have happened to me personally. I could go on and on and on about more claims, but the good news is for builder's risk is for the industry, it's a profitable line of business. And I do think it's profitable because the agents are all in all pretty good about making sure that the builders understand what's going on. Insurance to value is a key. Deductibles are a key. And some of these things I talked about, if they're not covered on the main coverage form, you do have the ability to endorse them. So I would say, I love it when a builder tells me, oh, Jeff, that's never going to happen to me, or it's never happened to me. If you can give them examples of real life claims that have happened, usually gets their attention. So these things do happen. So once again, I greatly appreciate your time today. What we're going to do now is open it up for a few questions, and I'll send you on your way. Thank you for your time.
All right, we only have a couple questions, but the first one is, so when there's a builder's risk claim that's caused by a subcontractor, who would pay the claim? Would the owner have to file a lawsuit against the sub, or will the builder's risk carrier step in and pay the claim?
All right, so I'm going to answer kind of in general terms. Usually the builder's risk carrier is going to pay the claim. First party claim, they pay. Let's say the builder was the named insured, owner was the additional insured, or vice versa. So they step in and pay the claim. Now they reserve the right to subrogate against the GL carrier for the sub to try to get recovery from that. So that could happen. But that's one reason builder's risk is a necessary coverage, because it prevents the delay in the project. They'll go ahead and pay the claim once it's covered peril, pay the claim, and we move on. Good question.
Okay. Does a Victor Ocean or builder's risk policy have liability?
We are a monoline inland marine program, so all we write is property. We do not have the GL. And I will caution you, there are carriers that advertise that they have GL available, and many times it's premises liability only. So it's not really the liability that a builder or a contractor needs. It's strictly premises liability. So just keep that in mind. But no, we are a monoline carrier writing inland marine only. We like to think we have the best coverage form in the marketplace, and we want to be experts at that. Good question.
All right. What would you require to substantiate experience in structural repairs? What considerations if building is very old and substantial repairs?
We have like I'll call a supplemental application. If it's structural, we're going to need an engineering letter, maybe the engineering, the structural engineering plans. We're going to need to look at the experience of the contractor. Actually, have they done this before? We will take a hard, close look at the building itself to make sure it's structurally sound. So it requires some underwriting, and that's kind of how we look at it. But it's not a definite decline for us. We will entertain it. I just always kind of chuckle because the agent calls me at 4:15 on Friday and said, I need a quote in the next 30 minutes. Chances are for structural, that's not going to happen. So, but it's not a definite decline. We'll take a look at it. Same thing with historical. If they're doing any work to a historical building, we're going to underwrite that very carefully. Good question.
How do you overcome frequency issues?
Good question. So we got, let's say theft. Let's say we have a lot of small thefts occurring. The easiest way to overcome that is to increase the deductible. And so it's like, if you're having a lot of small things stolen or vandalized and you increase the deductible, then the builder's going to have to take something. So the common sense practices are maybe fence the project. Some of the higher valued projects have watchmen. That's kind of unusual today, but that would be great to have a watchman. I've been reading more and more about more advanced security cameras that just notify in case there's movement on the job site or something. Depending on the values there, that might be worthwhile. But so there are things you can do.
How does insurance to value or co-insurance come into play when there's a fire loss?
Well, it comes into play at any catastrophic loss, any loss of any kind. You always could possibly have a co-insurance situation, which is what did you cover, what should you have covered, times the loss. So insurance to value is key. I know I always talk about this, but maybe we should go over it really quick again. What do we insure these things for? Selling price minus land is always the easiest thing to remember. So if the home is being sold for $1 million and the lot's $100,000, let's write a builder's risk policy for $900,000, and we will not have any co-insurance penalties. If you need some help figuring out what the insurance to value should be, pick up the phone and call us, and we'll walk you through it. Good question.
We only have time for a few more. Here's one about earth movement. Do builders risk policies cover earth movement, and have you seen claims arise such as shifting geotech soils or sinkholes?
Well, you guys are testing me today. So no, the typical builder's risk policy excludes earth movement. Now you can buy back earthquake, and you got to look at the quake endorsement that you're buying from whichever carrier you're buying it from. And many times earth movement is not covered. The earthquake would be covered. But if it's simply the soil was compacted incorrectly and it was a mistake, there might not be coverage on the builder's risk policy. So that is something you got to look into it for that.
All right, last question. Have you had any claims for settlement or foundation cracking?
Yeah, that's just what I was saying. So, if it was determined it was the damage because it wasn't compacted correctly, that's damage to your work, that would not be covered on the builder's risk. I don't want to get into professional liability now, but it might be covered somehow over there because they cover that. But in builder's risk, we're not insuring the quality of the workmanship. That's not a property coverage. So but that's just kind of it in general. These things get kind of subjective. It's hard to come up with one answer. So I don't know. I kind of danced around that one a little bit, but it really depends on the claim. So good questions, though. These are great questions, guys.
Okay. We still have a few questions, but we're out of time. So if your question didn't get answered, someone from our team will reach out to you personally and make sure that it does. And we'll be sending up a follow-up to everyone that attended and registered with the presentation slides. So you'll also get a copy of the presentation slides and the recorded presentation. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Jeff for being a great presenter as always. Look out for our next webinar in August. Wow, August, yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.